Well, hello! Welcome back to my channel. Deshauna here to talk about some friggin' books. I'm on my 4th video of the day, can you tell? I'll start off by saying a little reminder that if you watch this video and you don't really have much to comment, but you want to say hi, leave a little emoji down below. I have 4 books to talk about today. Let's get into it. The first book is Cinderella is Dead by Kalynn Bayron. This is a young adult fairy tale retelling of Cinderella, obviously, or reimagining, really. I'm gonna set it right here. So in this, it is 200 years after Cinderella's story in this made-up fairy tale world. And Cinderella's story is such a part of this culture that it's like borderline a religion. The king is evil, and there are decrees that right around the time of Cinderella, I think, or like right after Cinderella's time, these decrees were put forth to the kingdom, basically taking away all rights of women. Men can basically do whatever they want to the women in their household, and nobody will say anything. There's lots of domestic abuse, and there's sexual assault referenced. Not like on the page, from what is there any? No. So the too long didn't read kind of how I felt about this is that I read it pretty quickly and I enjoyed my reading experience quite a bit. And for what the book is, and I think what it was trying to do, I think it did it well. It's a fairy tale reimagining that very much feels like a fairy tale, like an original fairy tale. I think that if someone were to go into this expecting it to look more like a modern fantasy novel, they might be disappointed because the world building, especially, is pretty weak for like a traditional fantasy novel. But think about fairy tales. Think about any fairy tale that you know and are familiar with, you know, Sleeping Beauty or Beauty and the Beast or whatever. Like, do you know anything about the world? The larger world, not immediately surrounding them and what they're doing? No, you don't. Like, it's very, like, not a part of the story. If you go into it, though, expecting it to be a fantasy, you're gonna be disappointed. You're gonna feel like, oh man, like, there's not really any world building. Because there isn't, but I don't think there needs to be. So some cons for me, and I will do my best to not be spoilery. If I do see anything spoilery in my notes, I will give you a fair warning, don't worry. So the explanation or like reasoning for why Cinderella's story was used to control the people was a little bit weak for me. Like basically they used her story as propaganda for young girls for why they should want to be chosen by a man at this yearly ball that they had where the point was for girls to be chosen by men. And so like that made sense, like okay, it's propaganda for like, I want to be like Cinderella and get chosen like she was. But it didn't really explain why the king had these harsh rules for women and like why women's rights were totally taken away. It didn't really explain that. But it seemed in the world like people like, well, because of Cinderella, like that's why we have to be like this. But I was like, what? That doesn't explain it though. So that was a little weak, like I said, for me. And this book is super like anti-patriarchy. I mean, you can probably gather from the premise that I explained, like our main character is not about any of this. She's like, this is bullshit. This is propaganda and I'm not here for it. And she is super like smash the patriarchy, like all about it. And that's really cool and great. I love that message, right? But at times it was a little bit heavy-handed, where it just was kind of repetitive and like very overtly, like we get it. We get what the theme is already. So yeah, it was a little bit heavy-handed, and that kind of brought down my enjoyment a little bit. Mostly what like kind of brought down my rating a bit was the heavy-handedness of the message. And that's just like a personal enjoyment thing for me. And then a couple of things in the plot that were like a little weak or seemed to be irrelevant and never brought up again, things like that. It's a debut novel to my knowledge though. I thought it was a pretty strong debut and I would definitely be interested to see what else Kalynn Bayron does. But yeah, those couple of things like brought down my enjoyment a bit. But the prose, it was just a fun ass time. Like I said, it was really quick read. The pacing was really like consistently like quick, you know, not too quick, but I don't know, I just thought the pacing was really good. I wanted to keep turning the page, and that's always a good time. And like I was saying, our main character, Sophia, was just a freaking blast. She was definitely like a takes no shit kind of character, but at the same time, she didn't like succumb to how other people were, if that makes sense. Like there's one scene in particular, and I won't go into details about like where they are or whatever, but where a chick is being like snotty to her and like looking down her nose at Sophia and being like, and like making little bitch ass comments, right? And you know, I see that in a lot of books where then the main character will be like, yeah, well you blah blah blah, and like put them in their place, right? And you're like, yeah, hell yeah. But Sophia basically was just like, direct your anger where it belongs, because it doesn't belong at me. I know you're just lashing out because you're feeling some other emotions that have nothing to do with me, so take that elsewhere, essentially. Like, she told her to like F off, but in a very polite and like mature way, and I loved that scene. I was like, hell yeah. I love, like, she wasn't like stooping to the girl's level. And sometimes I think it's like fun and necessary for a character or human to do that and like come at someone the same way they're coming at them. But in this case, it wasn't necessary, and it would have just been like added drama for like no real reason. So I really appreciated that instead of going that route, she was just like, yeah, you're being bitchy about something else, and I don't have time to worry about this. Direct your anger where it belongs. I just loved that. And the representation in this book was great to see, full of POC characters, full of brown-skinned characters with curly hair and all of that. And also a female-female romance representation that was here, and that was really cool to see as well. The atmosphere of this book also was just like so whimsical and magical, which as a fairy tale reimagining, it should be. So kudos to the author for that. So yeah, overall, pretty solid. Not like one of my favorite books ever or anything like that, but like it was pretty dang solid, and I had a good time reading it. On my 1 to 10, I gave it a 6.4, which translates to 3 Pushinicorns. And then next up, Daughters of Neri by Reni K. Amayo. This was my Pushinicorn pick for my seasonal TBR. Here we go. So you guys voted on this. I just talked about this actually in my Pushinicorn pick video, so I will be probably pretty quick about this. This is a young adult fantasy, African-inspired world where the gods have been defeated, and there is a prophecy about twins being born that is not a good prophecy for the current evil king, evil ruler. These two girls are part of this prophecy. They are taken apart in infancy and raised separately, not knowing that they even are twins. They don't know anything about themselves or their background. The king ruler guy, the Ezi, is slaughtering villages because he doesn't want this prophecy to come true, and it was said that like in one of these villages these twins will be born. One of the twins, Nala, lives in one of these villages, and her village is attacked, and she escapes, obviously, because then the book would be hella short. She escapes, and then Sinai, the other one, is raised at court at the palace in like their major city, and she is like of noble blood, so that's why she's allowed to be at court, but she's also illegitimate, so everybody treats her kind of like shit. Things ensue as they learn more about themselves and what they are capable of. The long and the short of it is that there's the 2 points of view, both sisters, and I didn't really care about Nala's. I was really intrigued at the beginning with her. She was like this wild, free spirit. But then very quickly, I just lost interest in what was going on with her. I'm not going to get into it, don't want to do spoilers, but yeah, I just wasn't very invested in her chapters. And I wish we had seen more of the villain, the Ezi. I think that's how it's pronounced. There's a pronunciation guide in the back, but not for like character names. I'm pretty sure it's Ezi, it's just E-Z-E. But yeah, we see him like once or twice before the ending where he's very present. And like, everyone says how cruel he is and how scary he is, but you don't actually see him personally being cruel up close. You know what I mean? So there was like a distance to him being this evil guy. And I just think that the tension could have been higher had we gotten more of like a personal interaction or seen it more firsthand, like him being this like psycho, you know? Sanai's chapters I thoroughly enjoyed throughout. I felt like they were really solid. There was a lot more going on with her as far as like political intrigue at court, and then also her relationships and friendships that she had with like side characters. I was way more invested in that. I was way more invested in just Sanai in general and everything going on with her. The mythology was really great element, and in the second book, it looks like there's gonna be a lot more of that, which I am here for. And also the cultural lore and language used. I really enjoyed that. There's lots of Igbo language used and also some Yoruba, a fair amount of Yoruba, and a few others as well. And for me, language can really help if an author like leans into it and does it well. And I felt like Reni did it really well, where she just used it freely, like in dialogue between characters. They'd pepper these words in, and then even just in the text of the book, like just peppered in there and did it really well, where like I never had to actually look at the guide in the back, because it also is like a definition of like what this word means. And I never had to actually look because she did it really well, where like you could tell based on context. So I enjoyed this. I do plan on reading the next book. It wasn't like my favorite thing I've ever read. I think I would have probably I probably would have given this like 4.5 stars or something had I been more invested in Nala's chapters, because I just really wasn't. So on my 1 to 10, I gave this a 6.8, which translates to 3.5 Pushinicorns. There was one quote in this that I marked as like a quote to save, where these two soldiers are talking, and they're not really, one of them is like not about some not cool shit that's happening. And he's talking with his fellow soldier, and his fellow soldier is like, you can't be saying this stuff. And he's like, you need to be careful. You really need to be careful, like, about saying this and feeling this way, right? Because he's saying, like, I'm not okay with what we're being told to do. This is super not cool with me. And the soldier, and this is just some rant, he doesn't even have a name. Like, this is his only scene. You never see him again. He says, careful with what? My life or my soul? Which one do you really think requires more care? And I just love that line. Like, what should I be more worried about, my life or my soul? You know, because if I keep doing this, my soul is at risk. And I just love that line. Next up, A Promise of Fire by Amanda Bouchet, or Bouchet. I don't really know. This is a fantasy romance, adult, which is probably evident from the romance part of that. There are some smutty, sexy times, not until later on in the book. Up until that point, there's just like a lot of sexual tension happening, and like, will they, won't they type of thing. This is in a made-up world as far as the names of the kingdoms and things like that, but has Greek mythology. Greek gods are very much a part of this. There's hella magic, and some people can speak to the gods, and so on and so forth. There's literally Mount Olympus. Our main character, Kat, is working at a circus as a soothsayer. Her actual magic is that she can determine truth from lies. So if someone tells a lie, she feels it in her body in a really like intense way. It's like, feels like she's burning, and she hears like what the actual truth is. She catches the eye of a conquering warlord, Griffin, who wants to have her come to his country or his kingdom and help his sister rule, as she is a new ruler. He like took over for her, and she is now the ruler. Kat is just all the feistiness, fiery, sarcastic, keeping people at a distance by being like difficult all the damn time, like one of those characters. She's very argumentative, and a lot of times characters like that will just drive me nuts, because I'm like, shut up. And per the reviews, some people did feel that way, like the negative reviews, people were like, she's annoying, I can't. I wasn't really annoyed with her because we're in her head, and so we know that like it's not that serious. We know that like she's trying to like, I'm trying to be mad right now, but I'm not really. But like I needed to act like I'm mad, but like everyone around her also was like, we know you're not actually mad, stop it. And I don't know, I thought it was fun. Like, she's just not even taking herself that seriously. She's like trying to convince herself, and everyone around her knows it. There's also definitely the alpha male, possessive male thing happening here. And I love this trope. I don't love it in real life. This is definitely something where, like, if a dude tried acting like this toward me, I'd be like, sir, nah, knock it the fuck off. And there were 2 times in the book where Griffin did get a little, like, physically aggressive that I certainly am not a fan of at all. But even just the possessiveness of, like, you belong to me. Like, no, I don't. But yeah, definitely the physical aggressiveness and, like, I mean, like, abuse. It was, like, some mild physical abuse. Just, like, grabbing her and, like, picking her up and, like, kind of tossing her, you know, stuff like that. Not cool. Not a fan of that at all. And I wasn't a fan of that in the book. I was like, could we not, though? Like, But, like, the possessiveness, like, the verbal, like, you belong to me. I don't know. I think it's fun in a book. I don't like it in real life, but it's fun in a book. I really liked this world. I love Greek mythology, so, like, I'm a sucker for that. And the magic had very real consequences, which was also nice. And there's some political intrigue happening, and that was actually interesting to me, which it isn't always. I think I'm warming up to, like, political intrigue way more. I don't know, when it's done well and I understand what the hell is going on, it just makes it so much more interesting. And I just enjoy angsty romance, fated mates, soulmates, all of that. I just love, like, kind of enemies to lovers. It's fun. It's fun to read about. It's not realistic at all, but I'm a sucker for it. So yeah, I had a thoroughly good time reading this book. Thoroughly good. Like, I was messaging Nicole, who picked this book. She's the one that heavily recommended this, and I was messaging her on Voxer, just like, oh my god, like, loved it. And I picked up the series. It's a trilogy. I bought the like, trade paperbacks not this one. I actually don't mind this cover though. Like, I don't know. I think it's a pretty cool cover. I like the colors on it, I think is what it is. The colors on the inside, like, look how pretty. But yeah, I ordered the trade paperbacks, so I'm excited to continue the series. On my 1 to 10, I gave this a 7.5, which translates to 4 Pushinicorns. And next up, the final book for this recent wrap-up is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, a memoir manifesto. This is a young adult memoir, hello. And it's just about, I mean, it's not just, but it's about his experience going through childhood. It's a collection of personal essays. Essentially. It's not necessarily in chronological order or anything like that. And it's just kind of coming to terms with their queerness, their gender non-conformingness, that whole identity, and what it means to be Black and those things. And I think that this book is incredibly important, especially for young people, young queer people, or young people who are questioning their queerness and their identities in general, especially young people of color. Black for sure, but I think other people of color could also relate to a lot of the sentiments and the themes in this. So this is nonfiction, and as I told you guys before, moving forward with nonfiction, I'm not going to be giving it a star rating. I'm going to be like a would recommend or would not recommend. I would definitely recommend this, like I said, especially for young people who are queer or questioning, and also for adults who have young people who are queer or perhaps questioning in their lives. I think, I don't know, people who don't understand, especially with, like, gender nonconformity and whatnot, I just think it's really important to read things like this to get a better understanding. You're seeing this person's childhood experience with being invalidated or just not knowing, and because they were so out of the queer culture, not having any idea what certain things even meant or looked like, sexual experiences, things like that. So I think it's, like, super important. And so I definitely would recommend this book. Definite content warnings for, I mean, all those themes, of course. It's a little difficult in parts just talking about those things, but also sexual assault and sexual abuse, which can be the same thing, but this was like child sexual abuse and then later sexual assault. And they're both on the page, not just referenced. They're described, like the situation is described on the page. So be forewarned for that. Some homophobic slurs also on the page. There were a couple times that I got a little emotional with this one. This one, right like on page 13, it said, "I've never thought about immortality before. I always assumed that my mortality would be linked to my inability to survive as a Black queer person." And just like, if that doesn't hit you right in the heart, because that's how so many people feel. Black people in general, but of course Black queer people. It's like this ingrained almost assumption of like, I might not make it, you know, because of who I am. And that's just, I mean, sad, heartbreaking that so many people feel that way. So my one like con, and this was very much a personal thing, is that the authorial voice and writing style in general sometimes just didn't work for me. It felt a bit too telling, where like the themes, to me, the stories he was telling, these essays, explained it very well. But then he would kind of like overtell it a little bit. I just felt like there were things that like didn't need to be spelled out necessarily, that he was kind of spelling out. But again, that's a very personal thing. I would still highly recommend this book to most people, anybody, basically. And there we have it. Those are the books for today. As always, thank you so much for your time. Hope that you guys have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.